in the best. Okay. Yeah. So Chris said, as people were just arriving, Chris said something about us winging it, but as you'll see as we go forward, this is a highly polished presentation that we've done a number of times. But before Chris starts, so a bit of an intro. So most people know me. I'm David Osborne, Managing Director, Catalyst Choices, and I first came across Chris's organisation probably about 3.5-ish years ago, where I went to an event and Chris Wright, who's the CEO of Catch-22, now happens to be our chairman, was talking about Catch-22's role in establishing this new entity that was going to help public service spin-out, social enterprises, charities to do stuff like win new contracts, kind of gain finance, and support organisational change and improve their impact. And I thought that sounds quite good. We were struggling at the time, just getting into the 3rd year of our contract with the local authority, and they were playing some silly games and felt like we needed a bit of support. So I contacted the Capacity Lab as they were then, and we started on a small piece of work. But over the last 3 years, it's turned into something much bigger in terms of a strategic partnership, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so that's kind of Catalyst's relationship with Capacity and how it's developed over the last few years. But I'll introduce Chris in a moment. He's got a number of slides to give people some information and background about himself and Capacity, and then we've got a number of questions that we've put together that we'll kind of work through, and then usual format over to everybody else then. So hopefully that'll be interesting for everyone, and we won't run out of time before an hour and be stuck for stuff to say. So Chris, it's over to you now, I guess, to introduce yourself and Capacity, and we can crack on from there.
Great, thanks very much, David, and morning to everybody. If I can just share my screen. People see that? Mm-hmm. Great. So yeah, just a bit of background, I guess, to kick off. I'm Chris Catterall, Chief Exec of Capacity. And its first chief exec, its first employee. So about 4 years ago, I started out on this journey, and Capacity is very much focused around how we make public services people services. So how do we make those public services meet the sort of needs, meet the opportunities, and meet the challenges of the public at large? How's technology going to work? We predominantly operate across the northwest of England, so a very sort of strong concentration and base to Liverpool City region, but we do work across into sort of Manchester, Lancashire, and across the border into Wales as well. And we predominantly are working with the public sector, with social enterprises and charities, and a strong focus about the interaction between those two groups of sort of stakeholders. And we're very much trying to, meet the needs, meet the sort of aspirations of communities, and helping them to thrive. For a bit of background, so Capacity, we have a bit of a unique legal structure, and we're a limited liability partnership. And that journey started out, for those of you who may remember the Transform and Rehabilitation agenda of central government. So this was where central government wanted to effectively outsource the provision of people, or the sort of support for people that were low to medium risk who had committed an offence. It wanted to see charities and social enterprises from across the country win some of the big contracts to support those people. And Catch-22, who are one of our LRP partners, bid alongside other charities and social enterprises to secure some of those opportunities. For those of you who don't know the story there, all of those contracts, all of those big prime contracts that government put out, went to private sector organisations, and the sort of voluntary sector, social enterprise and charities, ended up with sort of subcontract relationships rather than sort of prime relationships. During that process, Catch22 developed a relationship with Interserve, developed a relationship with an organisation called Amberside, and they started to form an idea about, can we start to create in a place an entity which can give charities and social enterprises who need it more capability to be able to secure some of these larger scale contracts and opportunities, rather than always having to be a subcontractor or always having to pick up the crumbs. A little bit serendipitously, Big Society Capital ran a competition called the Business Impact Challenge. This is where it said to large corporates predominantly, look, don't just bake a cake on a Friday or wear a t-shirt on a Friday. What's some of that core capability that you've got that could be provided to charities, provided to social enterprises to help them do more, grow and develop. And capacity was the winning entry, I think, of about 50 entries into that competition, and secured about £1.6 million investment from Big Society Capital and also Interserve. And we began trading about March 2017. I think some people often say to me, are you a consultancy? Are you a direct delivery organisation? What is the sort of, I guess, the sort of business model, or the business model for capacity? And ultimately, I think we do what you might call sort of traditional consultancy work with the public sector. But we very much try and not just write reports. We're trying to work with the public sector to, do the research, do the understanding about how services could change, but then work with them to implement those changes rather than just see, reports on shelves. And if that involves at times having to get involved in sort of, direct delivery or kickstart projects, we do that, and we are involved in some sort of service delivery. But that's very much from the perspective of starting something new, disrupting a sort of service provision, rather than a long-term sort of service commitment or service delivery contract. I won't go through all the detail of this slightly complicated slide, but we sort of spend quite a bit of time in terms of the sort of traditional Venn diagram there, working between commissioners, working between the voluntary sector, and working with funders, both philanthropic funders and sort of social investors, to craft the solutions that are required in local areas. Got a range of sort of public sector partnerships, again, predominantly across the sort of northwest of England. There's a mixture there of local authority through to sort of primary care, but also into some acute care as well. And then we've got a network of about 25 voluntary sector social enterprise organisations that we support the development and growth of. And that ranges from, working with them around their sort of future business planning, helping them secure contracts. We run the finances for some organisations if that's needed. We provide coaching and development support to leaders in those organisations as well. There's a mix of some of those organisations. Just in terms of rough impact, roughly sort of 35 organisations that we've worked very sort of strongly with. We've secured over 45 million of contracts for the voluntary sector, social enterprise and charities. We've done a lot of sort of direct consultation with people, so 5,000 people through sort of one-to-one or small group consultation about what they want and what they need from public services. Our sort of evaluation internally has demonstrated a 63% improvement in the impact of organisations through working with capacity. That's a little bit of a backstory to us, or a little bit of background. I'll pass to David now in our smooth, slick presentation.
I'm glad you said that. So one of the things that we're going to start with, and I suppose it's useful that Neil made the comment, Neil, that you made earlier on about, kind of hating the local authority. And I suppose, although not necessarily strictly true for everybody, I guess we've, to one degree or another, a lot of the organisations that are in this meeting will have either been part of a local authority or certainly now experience being commissioned by local authority. And one of the things that I think a lot of us have struggled with is how you get local authority to do things differently or work differently, and that kind of the whole public sector kind of machine. So what's one of the things, Chris, that Capacity have been working on to try and persuade the public sector to do things differently and work differently?
Thanks, David. I think one of the important things we've done is listen to communities, listen to people. So, you know, as I said there, we've sort of done small group or one-to-one consultation with, you know, communities across the public sector, the sort of demographic about what they need, what they want, what their challenges are. So an example would be we've done a big project with Wirral Council about how they help families at the earliest possible opportunity. We consulted directly there with 500 people and created a body of evidence, which I would sort of argue was like the truth, or, you know, this is what people need. This is what, you know, this is the type of support they need. This is the way they want the support provided. And take that evidence and take that sort of body work back into the public sector to go, look, you know, these people are the people that you're here for. This is what they want and this is what they need. And it's very hard to argue against that from a commissioner, you know, or from a worker in a sort of public sector. You know, as I said, it feels like the truth. And you know, it's hard to dispute it. So you know, most of our projects involve that sort of grounding in listening to communities, what people need, presenting that back to commissioners, and then taking it from there in terms of how we can, you know, change and work differently with the public sector. I think the other thing is about finding and spotting people in the public sector who, you know, share a similar vision about how, you know, we deliver public services, you know, how we make it about relationships with people and not transactions with people, how we base it on their needs rather than the assumption of the commissioner. One of the interesting things, and this sort of goes back to the backstory of capacity, you know, the investment that we got from Big Society Capital was relatively patient. So the way that investment worked is we don't have to make any sort of repayments against the sort of debt, to use that term, until we've hit certain revenues. And that meant in the sort of formative years of capacity, so from sort of 2017, I've been able to spend a lot of time just meeting people without necessarily the pressure of a P&L. And I appreciate everybody on this call has probably got that pressure to a certain degree. And sort of spot and identify people who, yeah, as I said, have got that sort of vision for a different model of public service delivery. And, you know, work with them on projects, secure projects with those people. But through that sort of trust and through that strong relationship we develop with them, using them on the inside to, I guess, infiltrate others within that local authority to work in a different way, and for them to become sort of advocates of a different model of public service. So again, back to the example in the Wirral, you know, there was one or two people that sort of bought into our vision at the very start, who've worked alongside us over the past 3 years about how we help families at the earliest opportunity. And now I would say there's probably, you know, 60, 70 people in that authority that are really brought into that vision. But it started with that, you know, strong sort of relationship building with one or two key individuals at the start. And I think the other thing for me is about time. I think, you know, and everyone on this call will be time pressured, but I think the search for quick results, I think, becomes damaging. I think that, you know, people want to see a result in year 1, year 2, you know, a quick win. And I think some of this stuff about disrupting public services, changing the model of delivery, I think is not a quick game. It's a 5, 10 year game. It doesn't happen sort of overnight. So I think, yeah, you know, that again, back to that sort of investment that we have from Big Society Capital, it did give us time not to have to get some quick results and time to really build some strong relationships.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that
David, who was that? Was that your builder or was that your wife?
No. It was work. I thought it was the builder coming back. That's why I took it, but no, it's not. It's just someone from work. Sorry about that. One of the things that struck me then when you were talking about that, because many of us will have been, you know, you talked about finding those kind of champions or kind of infiltrators in local authorities or other organisations. A lot of us who have been in spin-outs probably fell in that role at some point. And
yeah,
what's the kind of feedback you get from them about how, you know, how kind of either lonely or how kind of proactive they feel in those roles? And have they kind of come back to you and say, look, we're really keen to kind of get on with some of this stuff, but I'm just so isolated, I need some more support to do some of those things? And have you had any of that experience as well?
From within the public sector, David?
Yeah,
I think so. And I think, look, it's dead easy to turn this, I guess, into a sort of public sector bashing session a little bit. You know, I think the challenges that they face in terms of, you know, the sort of economic austerity challenges, you know, I think some of the rise in need and rise in demand, and I don't think the politics, you know, is particularly favourable, you know, for sort of local authorities, or hasn't seemed to have been for the sort of past, you know, 5-10 years at least. It's undoubtedly isolating. And I think that, you know, we definitely reflected as an organisation in the past year that quite a lot of what we've done with some of those senior leaders in the public sector is just listen. You know, it's just provided the space for them to sort of, get stuff off their chest in a safe environment. You know, give them sort of peer support from other leaders across different parts of the public sector system, and then help them do some practical stuff to, you know, try and change, you know, the internal environment they've got.
And some of the stuff you talked about on your slides was about how you get, you know, social enterprise, voluntary sector to, you know, to kind of take a bigger role. And it kind of seems to me in our experience that, again, this, you know, it's not just a bash in public sector, but there's a trust issue on both sides, isn't there? You know, this kind of public sector know they need and want to do more to kind of get local community organisations involved. Local community organisations want to also do more. What are the kind of barriers that you've come across in trying to get those two pieces of the jigsaw, you know, to kind of fit together?
Yeah, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but one of the things I find most sort of perplexing at times is like how many commissioners and procurement teams, you know, can spend a considerable amount of money with the voluntary sector and or with charities and social enterprises, but very few of them have ever worked for one. Very few of them have ever worked. Some of them, you know, have never worked in an organisation. So I think that, you know, they don't understand, you know, the challenges between sort of, you know, running a business, recruiting people, managing people, you know, running the P&L, you know, stakeholder engagement, you know, all of that sort of stuff, you know, operating on short-term contracts, operating with thin margins, you know, all that type of stuff. So, you know, interestingly, in the sort of team of capacity, so we're a team of just over 20 people, you know, we've got 3 former chief execs of sort of social enterprises and charities. We've got 3 former directors of social enterprises and charities. And I think what we've tried to do with those sort of commissioning and procurement teams is, is advocate from a position of sort of experience of running some of those organisations, you know, the benefits that they bring, the ways in which you could work with them to maximise, you know, more benefits from those organisations. And that, you know, that does seem to have helped persuade them around some of the benefits of them. I think the other thing as well is about being honest. So I think sometimes the relationship with the public sector from the sort of voluntary sector side or the social enterprise and charity sector side can be sometimes the social enterprise and charity sector is brilliant. It's got all the solutions to all the problems. Its delivery is fantastic and amazing. And there's an absolute, you know, big chunk of it, which is that. But equally, and I'm sure we've all seen it on this call, there's some shocking delivery. There's some real poor practice that exists. So, you know, I think we're honest in our conversations with the local authorities about, you know, it isn't every organisation, every charity, every social enterprise that is brilliant and excellent, and I think they respect that sort of honesty. And I think also, you know, it doesn't always have to, you know, sometimes it is best placed for the public service to do stuff. You know, sometimes it is best placed, I think, sometimes potentially for private sector partners if they've got a particular capability that no one else has got, you know, to do things. And absolutely it will be the time for charities and social enterprises to do it. So I think, you know, sort of being real, having a realism to the conversation as well with the public sector about, you know, the quality of delivery and when it is best placed for charities and social enterprises to do stuff.
So on that theme then, what do you think? I mean, 2017 or thereabouts, the capacities existed. What have been the main successes then so far?
Just to go back quickly, David, one thing that we did, which I thought was, we put someone in the procurement team for 18 months.
Oh, right.
So we basically put one of our colleagues working in procurement over an 18-month period of time in a local authority. And that person had a sort of strong voluntary sector background. And they were given access to all the sort of pipeline opportunities that were coming through. And they were there to then work with procurement and work with commissioners to maximise within the law the way in which those contracts could be better suited for voluntary sector, better suited for social enterprise. And that absolutely did lead to more contracts. I think we saw sort of 60% of more contracts going through to the voluntary sector through that sort of input we put into a procurement team. Yeah. Anyway, back to your question.
That's probably one of the main successes then, I guess, isn't it? If you've been able to influence a procurement process and a team by installing a team member within that and kind of move, a lot of the time we've talked in some of these meetings about the limitations of procurement practice and public sector and local authority organisations being more creative and doing things within the remits of what they're able to do. So that feels like that was quite a positive step then.
It was positive. I have to say, it was bloody painful. It still is a bit painful,
yeah.
But it's definitely shifted practice. We're due at this point this year to release a report on it. The authority are keen for us to continue to do it. But I think by just being in that team, living and breathing with that team, opening that team to the possibility of what the sort of social enterprise and charities can do, it's definitely helped. So yeah, I think that's been a success. I think we took a sort of 2-year period of time, 18-month period of time with Wirral Council to really listen to what families needed to be able to get help at the earliest opportunity. At the same time, the authority supported us to really get to know and really get to understand some of the voluntary sector organisations within that borough, about what they could do more, how they could help people earlier, provide those organisations with some practical sort of organisational development support. We've just had the evidence through of the work that we've done there, and we've seen a sort of 31% reduction of children referred through to social care through the new provision of early help that we've put in place in Wirral. So I think that's sort of been a real success for us. We're now going to sort of evolve that model much more within that children's social care team within Wirral Council. It's starting to now get some thinking in place around sort of residential care within that borough and others. I think the work that we've done with Catalyst, David, I think that sort of tricky phase that you were in, post sort of spin out into now, one where it feels a more sustainable future. We've won some interesting contracts. We've got some interesting opportunities ahead of us. I think it's been a great success for us. We've been incubating in the City of Liverpool primary care networks. I don't know how many people have got experience of that from across the country, but effectively trying to get collaboration to a general practice at a more sort of local 30 to 50,000 population. So we've incubated 3 of those sort of networks supporting 150,000 patients to the City of Liverpool. And we're really starting to see some of those services now be more reflective of what people need. As well as, that income that we secure for the voluntary sector, around 45 million over the past 4 years.
And what about anything that's not really turned out in the way that you thought you hoped or you thought, or didn't really kind of particularly work?
In my hopes and dreams?
Yeah,
lots of things. I think going back to my slides, look, you saw there that we've got an interest in LRP Partnership. So we are part owned by Catch-22. We are part owned until next week by Interserve. We are part owned by Big Society Capital and part owned by Amberside, which is a private financial intermediary. So we are a split between a charity, the government's wholesale social investment bank, and the private sector. The private sector bit of capacity has never worked. Now you will have seen probably the sort of debacle that Interserve have been, affected into administration and sort of flat packed, which has caused those sort of reputational challenges. The sort of original vision behind capacity was that Interserve would bring a sort of a back office and mid office scale, efficiency, capability, which the voluntary sector would be able to access, and that would make them more sort of competitive and more sort of sustainable going forward. Two major fundamental problems with that. The voluntary sector never wanted that. So when I went out and spoke to the voluntary sector, in that sort of first phase of capacity, I think they all politely stuck two fingers up at me about, being able to access that type of capability. And secondly, and again, I'm being really frank here, but hopefully the honesty is helpful. Like when I looked at the sort of systems and processes that Interserve had, it wasn't groundbreaking. It wasn't going to, quite a few of the social enterprise and charities potentially have better sort of systems and processes than the sort of Interserve system and process. So yeah, Interserve, which will become public in the next couple of months, will be exiting our LLP. We from learning from David, partly, our LLP is now going to have a sort of staff ownership element to it. So the staff are going to take some ownership in the LLP, but that element of capacity is never worked out as envisaged. We've also had a project that we've done in Wales, which was around a new model of general practice across 3 practices called Community Care Collaborative, which was about trying to diversify the skill mix in general practice. So it isn't just about general practitioners, it's about mental health workers, it's about physios, it's about pharmacists, it's about social workers, and really meeting some of that needs of the community. We have definitely shown sort of reductions in emission into social care by about 25%, mental health care by about 35%. But that project will be coming to an end this year. And that in part has been down to some contractual challenges, but equally partly down to the culture within the sort of commissioning body and their sort of relationship to innovation and doing different things. So, we've learned some painful lessons in that project about what the right conditions are to work with the public sector.
Yeah, must have been quite challenging to get, at the same time that you're trying to establish a new organisation and a new branding capacity. You've got all the fallout of Interserve, and yet they're a key part of your organisation. And clearly, you found a time where that them and capacity in terms of values and everything else just wasn't a fit in the way that it might have been envisaged on day one.
Yeah, it's definitely fun when you pick up the Sunday Times on a Sunday morning and you see Interserve is going to go into administration, and they haven't told you that. Yeah, so that's I remember that feeling. But yeah, definitely challenging. And I guess in part we built our reputation on the work that we've done more than what our partners have provided to the organisation, and that's provided us with the credibility.
I mean, one of the things this group's talked about a lot, as everybody has over the last kind of 12, 18 months or so, has been COVID, and I guess social club in this format only kind of sprung out of Craig responding to the COVID situation. What's been, and obviously lots of our organisations, mine included, you've been looking at the way that you respond and develop, and business as usual, not, and all that type of stuff. So what about the capacity perspective in terms of COVID? What's been the impact of COVID on capacity, and what have you kind of achieved and learned from the experience of the last 12, 14 months or so?
I think in terms of the title of this presentation today, which is about how do you disrupt the public sector? Sadly, COVID has done that for us. COVID has disrupted the public sector. And I guess David, me and you share a very, real example of, where we were engaging, sort of the ICS and the sort of system to sort of Warrington, Cheshire way around how we get more sort of step down provision, within that community, banging our head against the brick wall many a time in that conversation. And then, because of COVID, the need to get additional capacity into the system to support people on discharge became, a huge importance. And, collectively between Halton Council, capacity, Catalyst Choices, and a sort of private sector partner in Eric Wright Group, we turned a sort of care home that was completely mothballed and wrecked, refurbished it fully, recruited a team of 40 workers, secured all the funding and the commissioning arrangements, and in the space of 6 weeks opened up a new facility for the sort of Cheshire and Merseyside, geography. And I think that demonstrated to us just how possible it is to move at speed, to get things done quickly, to collaborate across not just different organisations, but different internal teams within a local authority, from procurement to commissioning to finance to legal. And I guess my biggest learning from that was just, the challenge was visible to everybody. It was understood by everybody. It was real to everybody, both professionally and also personally. We all felt the impact of COVID. And I think that, that provided, like real alignment between different groups of organisations and separate organisations which perhaps didn't exist before, and gave us that ability to sort of move at speed and get things done at speed. I think the real challenge, and I think we're starting to, like, how do we keep some of that principle? How do we keep some of that atmosphere? How do we keep some of that that in us, and not revert back to the old ways of conducting ourselves? Because, from my perspective, and I heard before, there were certain charity social enterprises here working in the children's social care space, like kids in care is a pandemic. In my view, but how do we make that real to people, and how do we get people operating at speed to resolve some of those challenges? And is it just because sometimes there's a disconnect between what a child's facing and what the individual who's making the decisions facing within the local authority, and how do we bring that together more?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked a couple of times on this group about the fact that we suddenly, we kind of quickly stood up this new care home in response to COVID, but I've not talked so much about in the detail that you had about the way the partnership came together. And that's kind of, as you said, that's an example of looking to do things differently with a range of different partners. Why do you think it works so well for us, and continues to do so, hopefully, as well into the future with the other stuff we've got planned? But what was the key element for that success, do you think? Was it the timing? Was it just the situation we were in, or was it a number of like-minded organisations who just wanted to kind of get shit done and decided to do it? What do you think?
I think it was the quality of the relationships between, obviously us and Catalyst Choices, also, both of us in Halton Council, but it was based on trust. In that situation, I'll be really honest, and this is probably really crap governance, and my board are fully aware of it. We cracked on in that project at times when we didn't even have some contracts signed. Things were still going through various different sort of checks and balances. But the challenge of the number of people that were in hospital that needed to get out of hospital because of the impending, sort of wave that was coming towards hospital. Our board took the view, look, we've got to take that risk. Like, without this capacity, within that sort of health and social care system, things could be terrible. So I don't know. I think sometimes I find people try and overcomplicate business, and it's not, to a degree, it isn't rocket science, is it? It's about relationships between people. It's about trust between people. It's about common purpose between people. And when you've got that, it's really possible to do stuff. And I think that was a great example. And, yes, we took some risk on legals, and we took some risk on governance, some of that sort of, standard business stuff. But because of what we needed to do and the purpose, it was the right thing to do. Okay.
And there's quite a lot of questions starting to come in now, so we'll break in a minute. But just final one then, Chris. In terms of the future then for capacity, what's in the pipeline, and how do you kind of anticipate? You've talked about the business model for capacity. How do you anticipate capacity evolving over the next, 5 years, 10 years?
I think, as I said before, like, this to me feels like a 10, 15-year game. We're at sort of year 4 of it. I think that sort of trust that we built up with the commissioners and procurement teams will evolve, and hopefully the work that we've done. So it's taken us 4 years to get to the point of having 2 really strong public sector partnerships. We've got probably 2 just behind it that are emerging. But I think, again, back to that time point, I think that rate at which we've acquired those partnerships will hopefully quicken based on the track record that we've got and what we've learned. So I hope that we're able to, across our sort of prime geographies, develop more of those partnerships and influence the way that they work. We've got to a real interesting project with all of the children's social care teams across Liverpool City region about how we sort of intervene and create a more ethical model of children's residential care across Liverpool City region as the moment. And I appreciate there's people on this call that are in this place, but they've got a complete dominance of sort of private equity, private sector children's residential care within the city region, which has seen huge cost escalation over the past year. We've actually formed a sort of social enterprise vehicle in partnership with those authorities to try and bring about a more ethical provision into that marketplace, which has been backed by social investors and also investment from the local authorities itself. So that's a real big pipeline project for us. But hopefully we're able to infiltrate some more authorities about working differently with communities and working differently with the voluntary sector.
Okay, great. Cheers, Chris. I can get off the hook a bit now, can't I, and just go on to the questions. So I'm going to scroll to the top pen and see try and take questions in order. I think some of it, Chris, you've probably touched on anyway, but we can drop back into a couple. I think one of the first ones was from you, Tony, which was about initiating discussions with commissioners and the kind of way in. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Chris?
Say that again, David. What was
it? Was a question from Tony, really, Tony. So Tony, your question was about what's your way in, really, wasn't it? And how do you pin people down? Have you got any more kind of specific examples of that, Tony, that you wanted to drop into, Chris?
I think Tony's dropped off.
Oh, has he? Oh, right. I think you answered that a little bit, Chris, when you talked about being able to kind of place the seconded person into procurement and identifying kind of key champions within local authorities. All right. Well, I'd say there's one from Neil that I think, Neil, that we, off and on, we've had various different conversations about this, but Neil's saying that your local authority is going bust in the next 2 years and kind of moving into command and control. Neil, what's the situation there, and what's do you want to elaborate on that a bit for Chris?
Just that there's a danger that the commissioners retreat back to, I've just got to save money, and so they're kind of not listening to the longer term, which is something I'll put a bit later on. So therefore they're being very reactive to everything and very controlling in what they're trying to do. And it kind of relates back to Tony's, really. How do we hook them in to see, because they've got to have a longer term strategy at the moment. They can't just keep reacting like this and just cutting money left, right and centre. So yeah, it's about any tips about connecting to them in a different way. And as I said, Nick and Jude stuff, how do we make them more piratey?
Very good. Isn't this what they tried to do in 2008 when the crash happened?
Yeah.
Didn't they go for, let's go for the efficient approach, less whatever they thought efficient was, let's go for the big providers. And, I certainly I've sort of seen that sort of reflection back from local authorities and health over the past 3 years at least, that that big is beautiful, that sort of salami slicing approach that we went for has failed us now. And what we're seeing in terms of the demand we're facing now is part of it is the impact of some of those decisions. So I've certainly been replaying that sort of message to commissioners more recently, and particularly as they sort of rear their head out of COVID and look to the next couple of years. But I think that, back to what I said at the start, there are absolutely naysayers to the voluntary sector. There's absolutely naysayers to, the independent provider sector. There's a, we're in a geography, certainly in Liverpool City region, where there's some that just think the local authority and the public sector should do everything, for itself. And I don't sit there saying everything should be outsourced and everything should be in the hands of the voluntary sector, but I do think that what's the real capability, what's the real value, what's the thing that the voluntary sector and social enterprise sector and charity sector can do, which actually the public sector can't do, and being really clear with that with the public sector, and pitching on that basis. But yeah, I guess the far left leaning of some local authorities makes that conversation incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and there's a reality that the home care provided in our local authority is £26 an hour plus. you know, and it is pretty good quality, I'll give them that, but the reality is they won't pay more than 16 to us. And so that's straight. And, you know, I could argue, actually, you pay us 26 the same. And in these days, the thought of them spinning out the cost to us with government pension, etc., would be really, really too high. So they're kind of in an interesting space, aren't they? Because they're stuck with what they've got. Because the real truth about saving money is probably to push the services out. But that's politically contentious. And also, you know, it's about, yeah, you know, that's a big number for us, to be honest, you know, and that levelling up, if I can use that expression, of the funding is quite telling, really. The other side of it is we keep pushing the hyperlocal stuff. During the pandemic, you know, we were an anchor organisation and we just proved ourselves time and time again, not trying to prove ourselves just because that's what we knew and what we could do, but that's important to keep that agenda going as well, to say that we are part of the solution. But there needs to be some long-term strategies, otherwise they're going to kill everyone off before they get anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got Lisa Dickinson's asked, have you got a question, Lisa, about the future of commissioning for Chris?
Yeah, it was just simply your views on what things are going to look like. I know none of us really know. We're a city region like you are, what things will look like post CCG as we move to ICSs. Just if you've got any opinions on that.
It's going to be messy, that's for sure. I think one thing that we've sort of been pushing, particularly in some of our local areas, has been, you know, a sort of push around sort of alliance contracting with the voluntary sector and with social enterprises and charities. And that's gained some real momentum in a couple of the authorities that we're sort of working in at the moment. I think some of that is helping to overcome the challenge that local authorities face about, you know, they feel if they engage with the voluntary sector, they've got to have sort of, you know, multiple contracts and you know, the effort and the work that goes into that. So I suppose, you know, what we've been trying to do is, you know, the sort of the disruption that is going to come about with the, you know, the end of CCGs, the ICSs, you know, perhaps even some, you know, sort of mergers or more stuff being pushed into sort of combined authorities rather than local authorities, is to use that opportunity of disruption to get through some different operating models and different contractual relationships, such as sort of, yeah, alliance vehicles and you know, presenting those sort of collaborative commissioning vehicles of the voluntary sector into local authorities. And we're definitely starting to, you know, to see that. And equally, you know, again, this comes back to the work that we did with a local authority where we were in their procurement team. You know, in that sort of alliance contract that we've been designing, you know, we've done it in such a way that actually the local authority is part of the contract. You know, they are part of the alliance delivery model. So we've used that as an opportunity rather than always to have that sort of, you know, hierarchical relationship between commissioner and provider. You know, how do we get the sort of commissioning provider at, you know, at that sort of level much more, so that, again, going back to some of the things that I was saying before, you know, they get real insight and real experience of, you know, the delivery done by voluntary and charitable organisations, and the power dynamic also shifts, so it isn't just always feels like that sort of parental relationship. So yeah, I don't have any silver bullets, Lisa, on what it's going to look like over the next 3 or 4 years, but I do think it does offer the opportunity to get some different commissioning models into play.
Yeah, there was another point on commissioners, Chris, from Christine O'Connor. Christine, I don't know if it was a question particularly, or just a point that you wanted to share about commissioners being removed from the reality of delivery. Is Christine there?
I think she's dropped off, David.
It looks like she's dropped off as well, doesn't she? I think the point there, Chris, was that, you know, I think it's something that we may have shared a number of times before, and there's a touch on today about commissioners being removed, you know, and Neil kind of touched on this before, you know, focus on, you know, KPIs and, you know, kind of outputs rather than outcomes, and, you know, that kind of cycle of kind of fear of decommissioning services and stuff being too hard to do, so they just kind of default back to the, you know, the same way of doing stuff, really. Caroline, you made a point about what Hull's done in terms of understanding VCS organisations. Is there something that you want to share there about that?
Well, other than it being a really hard slog, yeah, I think the point is it's not an overnight win, is it? So, we've had 3 CEOs from quite big organisations acting on behalf of the rest of the voluntary sector organisations. So they've been seen as VCS liaison member people who have sat at strategic boards like the Health and Wellbeing Board, and I use the royal we because it's a collective of people that are now leaders of organisations that have come together, and we've really tried to demonstrate our worth. So how many people do we employ? How much do we contribute to the local economy? Which was a really difficult piece of work to put together, because a lot of that information doesn't exist, but to kind of not just demonstrate your worth, but then to be able to demonstrate the impact that you have, because I think the point about a lot of commissioners are far removed is absolutely accurate. I think one of the strengths that we have had is one of the heads of service in the local authority actually isn't, her history isn't with the local authority. She was with Sports England for a period of time, so it actually comes with a completely different mindset, and that is so refreshing, really helpful. That she doesn't come with that. She has some independent train of thought in the world of local authority, which is heavily weighed down with lots and lots of baggage. So and I think every local authority, in essence, is actually quite different, although you're trying to accomplish the same thing. And that ability just to be able to demonstrate what we offer and what we can do. And I think COVID gave us that opportunity. And some of the things you've just described, people were turning things around really quickly, whilst the local authority were in the midst of panic and chaos and didn't quite know what to do or how to go about doing it, because the way they normally go about doing things takes a year to 18 months, because it's got to go through so many boards, and where we just got on with it. So that was really quite refreshing. So, just a mixed package over in Hull, but actually one where we've now got 4 themes of work that are jointly being led by VCS reps and the local authority. And one of those is commissioning. So it's about being able to say nicely what we need to have different for people to hear that, because it, as we just said, some of those commissioners don't understand. So it's just a long old slog about creating some change and some understanding. So just some different stuff, but it is really difficult. Really difficult.
I mean, sorry, Chris, go on.
And I think that's two-way as well, a little bit, Caroline. So like an interesting development for us over the past 6 months is like, we've recruited actually someone who's a commissioner and was formerly in procurement into our team. So, where I was saying before that, we've got 6 people who've been either former chief execs or directors within a voluntary sector. We've now got, some commissioning, experience in our team too. So I think, how we sort of like, get more diverse teams across the sort of third sector and social sector, so that there's greater understanding of either side of the fence, I think is really important. And I guess like a bit of an outcome for us recently as well, we've, a former director of children's social care to the city region has now just become part of our team as well, which, again, that just brings that insight and knowledge and the way that you work with local government that, I don't certainly have. He has an absolute, buckets. So yeah, how we create more diverse teams, I think is a key bit.
So you've got infiltrators both ways there then, Chris. Not only have you put infiltrators into local authority procurement teams, you've recruited that kind of skill set back into your team as well then, I suppose, which is the key to understanding it.
Absolutely. And I won't name the guy's name, but he's still, we're doing some work with a local authority, at the moment. And, I had a catch up with him last week, and, he was there all day with a local authority. And, he said, I basically sat there all day, Chris, singing. I don't even know this song really, but I'm not going to sing because that would be pathetic. But, he was like, it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. And he was just repeating that time and time, their instinct about what they were doing wasn't necessarily wrong. The biggest challenge was their instinct about the way that they were doing it, and the sort of impact and ripple effects that has. So, I think a big element of this, is the sort of culture change rather than necessarily the sort of mechanics.
I mean, Scott made the point about in the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity. And there's a few people on the chat who were talking about different models that they've been involved in. Scott, if you're still there, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to expand on with regards to that, any specific instance that you wanted to share.
Yeah, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was not me that came up with that quote. It's the art of war, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, I think with the advent of the ICPs, there's going to be lots of opportunity, and I think it's about. I think often we shout into the system about how the system needs to flex around us. I think we need to organise ourselves around the system. I mean, the probably every 5 years there's a major restructure, especially in the NHS, in the kind of sector that we predominantly work in. So I think there's a real need for us to operate in a different way. I think Chris has touched on, the need for maybe closer working. I think that there's a continuum of working, everything from kind of mergers to more formal partnerships and collaborations. And I think as a sector, we have a track record of not doing that as well as we could do. I think, Chris has obviously worked with the private sector and the public sector, and I think sometimes they're much better at kind of collaborating in more meaningful ways than we are as a sector. So I think there's a challenge there to us, but also a great opportunity around organising ourselves in a way that can get best impact for the people that we're here to work with, but also we can kind of put ourselves front and centre of the kind of solutions that the public sector needs.
Yeah, good point. And I think we've Michelle talked about delivering an alliance model in Stockport for the last 7 years. So some of this stuff isn't new, is it? And there's obviously still some great examples. And Michelle, I don't know whether there's anything that you want to share about why that's worked so well and how it's developed over that 7-year period. What the key to that kind of being successful has been.
Yeah, so I mean, very similar than you were talking about, really. So the alliance model with starting off with the commissioner as kind of part of the alliance leadership team, so to try and change the balance of the relationship. And I would say so we've just come to the end of the 7-year contracts and it's going out for recommissioning now. And I think the council will move away from an alliance model, but will retain that they want a partnership. And so they'll end up probably using the concept of the alliance without calling it alliance going forward. And I would say it probably took a couple of years, really, for us to really get into that kind of different way of working, because to change the power dynamic between commissioner and commissionee took a long time. The commissioners, even though they were around the kind of leadership table, would revert back to traditional commissioner behaviour, and we had to work really hard to kind of shape that. And it took a long time to understand that alliance contracts also need to be monitored differently, so it wasn't a kind of traditional contract management process. Sure. But when we got through those first couple of years, it's been brilliant, actually. And I think the service for the people of Stockport has been so much better. So it's 6 non-profit organisations, all from kind of different backgrounds, different sizes, and the council as part of the contracts. And it's been great. So we'd be a massive fan of it going forward in other areas.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, that's a great shout, isn't it? Having the commissioners part of the alliance contracts, as you said, Chris, or part of the leadership group, as you said, Ben, because we've in Warrington we had a similar approach where all the local kind of third sector, fourth sector kind of organisations got together, formed a partnership. But the way the council wanted to commission was still in the same old way. They didn't see themselves as part of that alliance. It was like, you're the alliance now, how are we going to commission with you? Well, there's got to be a lead, and then there's got to be a sub, and they just couldn't get their heads around that. So I can kind of feels familiar to me as well, actually, some of the stuff we've done.
I think also, David, part of the sort of disruption job, I think, is not just relying on the same boundaries and the same silos that we've worked in, over the past sort of 10 and 15 years. So an example for us at the moment is we're starting to work with a new local authority area based on some of the work that we've done in children's around early help. Now, what we said to that local authority was, yes, we've done a considerable amount of this sort of change here, but so is the voluntary sector, and so has the actual commissioning team at that local authority. Are you against them being part of our sort of delivery team in your local area, in terms of providing the insight and the knowledge of, of what we've done? So not necessarily the actual practical doing, but in terms of the setup and getting it mobilised. So it's been quite an interesting experience for us to be going into this local authority area where actually, you know, one of the deputy directors, one of the directors from the local authority, alongside some of our team, alongside some of the voluntary sector, are part of the implementation team into that local area, and we're all part of the one thing. So I do think that, you know, it's dead easy, isn't it, for us to separate ourselves out into public sector, voluntary sector. You can't go across border, all the rest of it. But actually, back to what I was saying before, you know, this is about people, and, you know, people who share a vision, and then, you know, those people working with others that want to achieve it. And yeah.
Well, I think that's a great point to finish on then, Chris, in terms of that, because we're right on time. So, you know, as per our polished presentation, went perfectly on the hour, didn't it? So that was a really good point to finish on. I think we've got to stay on a bit, I think, Pen, haven't we, me and you, Chris? But as for everybody else, I think that's about it, isn't it, for now? So thanks